dictionary definition of music is the art of arranging sounds in time through the elements of melody, harmony, rhythm, and timbre. Low Pass Filter is a show about the nature of this thing we call music, how it functions in people's lives, how it's contextualized by society, and why we find certain music meaningful. This is Low Pass Filter. Welcome to Low Pass Filter. This is a show about the nature of this thing we call music. My name is Mateo and I'm joined by Low Pass Filter co-host Bandon Wayne. Hey Bandon.
Hello.
How you doing today?
I'm doing all right, man. I'm on a wing and a prayer here.
Right on. Well, as the regular viewers know, we go back and forth on this show, and we each, between Bandon and myself, and we pick a theme every time. And this time, it's your turn to pick a theme. Why don't you tell everybody what your theme is?
All right. Well, I thought long and hard and came to the conclusion we needed to talk about psychedelic music, psychedelic rock, and maybe some psychedelic pop music, kind of unearth the origins of it a little bit and then talk about where it goes from there.
All right, well, we could just start by establishing some terms of what psychedelic music is, was, will be in the future. And according to Wikipedia, citation needed, this is a wide range of popular music styles and genres influenced by 60s psychedelia, subculture of people who use psychedelic drugs such as LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, DMT, and marijuana to experience visual and auditory hallucinations, synesthesia, and altered states of consciousness, and it may also be named to enhance all those experiences that you have when you are imbibing or ingesting.
Indeed. I swear I've only used a couple of those.
Yeah, me too, and only accidentally. Somebody slipped something in my drink, I think, is what happened.
That was more common. Well, people slip other things in people's drinks today, but yeah, back then, you might get dosed, as they would say.
It's funny going for, songs for the show, and I'll just mention that we both have our Spotify playlists. You can find them in the description, and you can listen along to the songs as we talk about them. I was looking for Timothy Leary is Dead by the Moody Blues on Spotify, and it so happens that it's not there. It's been removed from In Search of the Lost Chord. Everything else from that album is there,
Wow.
But that song is gone. And it's just kind of weird. I wonder if it's because he's actually dead now. I don't,
He took the rights to that piece of music with him, I guess.
I guess so, but let's just talk about, since I brought up Timothy Leary, we could talk about the kind of roots of psychedelia and the drug culture that accompanies it. And there's the three Ds that you might know. And the first one is disassociation, a distorted perception of sight and sound, producing feelings of detachment from the environment. Number two, depersonalization, the feeling of being unreal, disconnected from oneself, and unable to control one's actions. Happens to me all the time. And derealization, I like that word, derealization, the feeling that the outside world is unreal or one is dreaming.
Wow. Yeah, some of those have almost a dark, disturbing connotation, which I don't think most of the psychedelic music was trying to tap into as much as a more positive consciousness or altered consciousness. But yeah, certainly something about trying to look at reality differently in terms of understanding our existential selves, I suppose.
So anyway, let's start off with you, and let's talk about a couple of things that you have on your list for psychedelic music. What kind of tops up your list?
Well, I went in quasi chronological order in my list, not exactly, but sort of tried to come close to how psychedelic rock music kind of evolved. A lot of it was obviously happening all around a similar time. The explosion probably would be around 1966. And so I think the unanimous first group to sort of refer to itself as psychedelic rock, or people thinking of them as psychedelic, were the 13th Floor Elevators out of Texas. And there certainly is something about their sound, largely due to the use of the amplified jug, glass jug being played through some kind of effects box. It's very heavily tremoloed. And aside from things you can do with an electric guitar, I can't think of a sound that sounds as, kind of the effect of a psychedelic drug trip in the music. An anecdote that somebody said, I suppose the jug player in the group, was the sound of the jug from night to night during their performances was dependent on how much booze was still in the jug. But yeah, a couple of the songs I used as examples are my favorite 13th Floor Elevators tunes, and the lead singer of the group was Rocky Erickson, who ultimately suffered a pretty tragic life due to drug use and incarceration from being apprehended while in possession of drugs and being on drugs. Although I would assume retrospectively it would probably be that he would be diagnosed with a predisposition to mental disorder. But to me, Rocky Erickson has one of the most naturally gifted rock and roll voices, and their sound was a sound that you could not, at this point, call anything but psychedelic rock, I think. So we got them, and then both of us, of course, have Jefferson Airplane, White Rabbit, I believe. You probably have a deeper familiarity with that tune than I do. Love the song. Wasn't as big of a Jefferson Airplane fan as some other groups, but certainly that song kind of typifies the beginning of the psychedelic rock era, I think, of the late 60s. And then we get into some of the psychedelic Beatles, who probably brought that idea in popular music to the masses more than anybody else. If you want to expand on that.
You had Blue Jay Way and Tomorrow Never Knows, a couple of great choices. I went for Strawberry Fields Forever in my Beatles choice, basically because of the Freak Out. And that was kind of a signature psychedelic thing. They would have the song, and then there would be this sometimes very, very lengthy, just nonsensical musical collage that would just, and they still call them freakouts, actually. Some bands still do this in the course of their making music. But yeah, for me, Strawberry Fields, kind of had, I mean, I didn't realize it at the time. It took me a while to come on to the fact that, see what I did there? Come on to the fact that that was, had something to do with altered states of consciousness. But yeah, it definitely had that unearthly sort of thing. I didn't have White Rabbit. That's a good choice, of course. But I didn't put them on my list for some strange reason. I mean, the problem with this topic is that it's so expansive. There's so many different ways you could go. There's psychedelic folk and psychedelic pop and neo psychedelia, which we'll get into later. And there's just it's a huge field, and people are making this music to this day. So I kind of had to, comprehensively scratch the surface, in anything that we came up with. For my list, I started off with the Holy Modal Rounders, which really sounds a lot like a jug band, and in fact they were. John Fahey was in the band, and they got a little stranger as they went along, but it's tagged as the first reference to psychedelia or psychedelic in any song. And it wasn't a psychedelic song. It was Hesitation Blues, which is an old blues tune. Their version of it had a reference to psychedelia in it. And then the other one, kind of proto psychedelia person, was a guy named Sandy Bull, who put out this album called Fantasias for Guitars and Banjo in 1963. And he featured the choral guitar, which is, as you guitar players probably know, is a guitar that sounds a little bit like a sitar. It's an electric guitar, and it's set up in such a way that it makes a sitar-like sound. It got used extensively in all kinds of different kinds of music, including psychedelic music. But Sandy Bull was also brought in like tabla and different Middle Eastern ouds, and those kinds of instruments, which became sort of a signature for psychedelic music.
That's very interesting. Yeah, so it sounds like he had something creating a sympathetic resonance on his guitar, perhaps, which is very East Indian. I'm aware of him, had no knowledge that he would be kind of a link in that. John Fahey. Then you could have he certainly recorded some psychedelic folk music, as well as being a very traditional finger-picking guitar player. And that led me to think of the Incredible String Band. They were taking folk instruments into a very psychedelic space. Even in Germany, with like the first iteration of Alman Duel, groups like that were doing psychedelic folk music as well. I kind of jumped off more from the rock and roll perspective, but yeah, as you said, there's so many kind of different subcategories within that happening in the mid to late 60s. So like even what people refer to as Baroque pop had psychedelic qualities to it in a way which are different than the more acid rock psychedelia. And yeah, there's just so much, so I ended up putting Sister Ray by the Velvet Underground, talking about Freak Out. There's, a pretty heavy feeling of that within that song. It's an epic jam, and there's parts where they're just going crazy. Pink Floyd, Lucifer Sam, off the first Pink Floyd record. Syd Barrett, another seeming casualty of drug use, but I think he was probably also prone to mental illness. Hurdy-Gurdy Man by Donovan. Donovan was a folk pop artist, but took it into a bit more psychedelic kind of spiritual realm. I think I put something on my list by Mark Bolan, Tyrannosaurus Rex, who became T-Rex. Similar kind of psychedelic folk. Yeah, I mean, we can't spend too much time on all of these things, but we have a lot of great references between our lists, so people can dive in.
I had Pink Floyd See Emily Play. That first record, Piper at the Gates of Dawn, was a fully psychedelic record, the only record that had Syd Barrett on it, and he, of course, made a lasting impression on Pink Floyd, even after he, went crazy and went off somewhere. See Emily Play kind of cracked into the pop charts as a psychedelic song. I think it was like 1966. And then I had something off of Syd Barrett's solo record, Octopus. He was definitely out there. I think he took some trips that he never returned from. But yeah, and then there are bands that are just so obscure, especially now. Especially bands like Aorta, which was just a monster psychedelic band. Jeff DeMarc, who is a monologuist here in Humboldt County, did a whole show about dropping acid and listening to Aorta album over and over and over again, driving all his college roommates absolutely insane. But they're best known for The Shape of Things to Come, which was actually a Barry Mann Cynthia Weil song. So, even the mainstream songwriters wanted to get in on the psychedelic action that was happening at the time. And also, I have on my list a Kaleidoscope, which was David Lindley's. I don't think it was his first band, but it might have been like his second band. And so they were a fully psychedelic outfit. The song I referenced is "Keep Your Mind Open," which is kind of a mantra for people that were experiencing those kinds of trips and experiences and vibing in those kinds of chemicals. And then the Doors, I had on the Doors. A lot of people, I don't really think of them as that psychedelic, but they had their psychedelic moments, especially like in the song "The End," which is a very very dark song. And even their name was inspired by the Doors of Perception. Aldous Huxley, who was a pioneer in the LSD world, along with Timothy Leary.
That's an interesting one with the Doors because Jim Morrison believed in using psychedelic drugs, particularly natural psychedelic drugs like mushrooms, peyote, and he was apparently into, taking really meaningful trips through an altered state. And I think you could certainly have an experience listening to the Doors and being in an altered state, or even without changing your state. But the Doors can be very psychedelic, yet I don't, like you said, I don't think of them as much of a psychedelic rock band in the same way as others. But I think they do fit in. I did leave them off my list for some reason. I put another Los Angeles band from the same time that some people argue is the superior band to the Doors, a group called Love. And that kind of leads me to how some things like psychedelic pop or Baroque pop were regarded as part of this movement, which, maybe don't exemplify some of the same qualities of what would later be considered like psych rock, heavy psychedelic rock. So you take Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys. You look up any list of important psychedelic records and Pet Sounds is almost near the top, but it's an orchestral pop record. It's hard to say, but I guess if it was influential, it was. And I think it kind of spurned that period where the big groups like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Who, the Kinks were all trying to make that statement record of being kind of turned on, or something that was outside of the more mainstream pop feeling. And so that's when you got Sgt Pepper's. Some people would regard Something Else by the Kinks and their Satanic Majesty's Request by the Rolling Stones as all part of that 1967 psychedelic explosion. But were those heavy psychedelic records? Probably not in the same way that started to come along from that era to really typify psychedelic music. I also put Arthur Brown's Crazy World of Arthur Brown, which, as you mentioned, having a freak out moment in your records. The majority of that record to me is a crazy freak out. A more obscure band who I think was very psychedelic was the Silver Apples, which were two individuals. One, the drummer, who played this kind of very metronomic yet somehow kind of groovy drum style, paired with the singer who played a massive bank of oscillators. So basically Moog technology, but he was able to control multiple oscillators all at once using his arms and legs, and so they have this really trippy, groovy, psychedelic sound that's not like anything else. And then you have something like the group the United States of America, which I think you're familiar with.
I am.
And the leader of that group, Joseph Byrd, actually had a residency at College of the Redwoods as a professor for some years.
I'm going to interrupt us here for a second, and we're going to take a break. We're going to go away for a minute, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Low Pass Filter. Mateo Noche here with Bandon Wayne. We're talking psychedelic music, and I just wanted to mention while we're talking about some of the features or some of the characteristics of psychedelic music include things like exotic instrumentation, the sitar and the tabla. They also have distinctive song structures, key and time signature changes, modal melodies and drones, and they often have like a surreal, whimsical, esoteric, and even literary style lyrics in them. A lot of tape-driven effects, backwards guitars, where you flip the record, the master tape over, and you play your guitar and you flip it back over, and it comes out backwards, which is a really fun thing to do if you've ever tried that. And a lot of drippy reverb on everything. They just really slathered that reverb in there, because basically that was one of the few effects that anyone could afford. Everyone had a reverb tank attached to their amplifier. And you could hook that up to the vocals, you could hook that up to keyboards, and you can do all kinds of crazy stuff with it. So yeah, so just getting back, I'll just drop into some of the stuff that I had on my list. There's a band called the Head Shop. They only made one record, but it was a doozy. And the song I have is "Heaven Here We Come." This is a psychedelic band from New York, and they released this one record in 1969, and it's just the album cover is like worth the price of admission on its own. The Electric Prunes, another one that it sounds ridiculous now, and I guess maybe it sounds ridiculous then, but they had the song called "I Had Too Much to Dream Last Night," which is a great one and very evocative. And then Procol Harum, kind of a weird mashup of a bluesy band, but they had this song called "A Whiter Shade of Pale," which is a very trippy song with very trippy lyrics. A great song. I think it's might be based on a Bach cantata or something highfalutin like that, but also kind of brought you into a whole another plane of existence. And I mentioned Aorta, I mentioned Pink Floyd, and then one we both had on our list was Jimi Hendrix. And he was a very trippy guy, very much into altered state of consciousness. The famous thing about him dropping acid at Woodstock, and because he thought he wasn't going to go on, and ended up going right on. But he was very much a person of that time. It's said that he heard Sgt Pepper in the afternoon, and he covered it in the evening in front of the Beatles with a three-piece band, which is I don't know if there's any tape ever exists of that, but that would be something to hear. And then so I had Third Stone from the Sun on mine, and you have a lot. Why don't you talk about the Jimi Hendrix songs that you referenced?
I went straight for Voodoo Child. In parentheses, Slight Return. There's so many. His first album, of course, has material that people would consider psychedelic, but I think by the time he got to Electric Ladyland, the experimentation he was doing with effects, and like you had mentioned, backwards tape recording and stuff like that. He was very much a leader of a certain psychedelic attitude. I picked Voodoo Child because I just absolutely love that song, and particularly the recording from Woodstock. I just listen to that all the time. It's a long take, and the quality of his guitar is just a lot of us today kind of go to in our minds when we think about psychedelic guitar sound. So there's lots of Hendrix songs that could have been picked. Grateful Dead's Dark Star.
Right. I mean, you cannot talk about, psychedelic experiences without the song, I guess. They're infamous for doing these, 90-minute versions with a 30-minute drum solo,
Yeah.
I never was. I was just going to say, I was never a huge a Grateful Dead fan. I know that's heresy to a lot of people I know, but I maybe just didn't get them, and like the albums that I like, I have a feeling that most Dead fans consider them to be their worst records, but yeah, I mean, they were an experience, really, and that went on and on and on into the 90s, of people following them around, ingesting substances, twirly, twirly, twirly at the concerts, and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, they were, I mean, the full boat experience, a psychedelic experience. And of course, we're there for the acid test, the Ken Kesey acid tests, and do the light shows, see the light show, take the trip, the whole thing. So yeah, you cannot say the word psychedelic without putting in the Grateful Dead, I don't think.
Yeah. Yeah, those light shows too. Of course, I was either too late or the later incarnation of the Grateful Dead I wasn't interested in. I had no concept of doing what their fans were doing by going out on the road and following them from city to city. But yeah, you mentioned the psychedelic light show, and then there was also the oil lamp projections, which probably were present at perhaps Pink Floyd shows. I'm pretty sure Hawkwind in the UK was doing those kinds of similar type of live experiences where it was about the music, but also the people communally tripping and sharing in that psychedelic experience together. So yeah,
for people who don't know and are not experienced, I should just mention what an oil lamp is, and essentially what it is it's two sheets of glass with some sort of oil, usually like linseed oil or cooking oil in between it, and they would show colored lights through this, and they would either project it on the backdrop or on the band, and I think this is an effect that should come back. I mean, you don't see, nobody does this anymore. But and of course, I'm sure they could make it digital now. It would be completely, it would be on a chip somewhere. But yeah, it was a very organic and trippy and weird sort of effect that was very very effective and very evocative. In these shows.
Yeah. Nowadays it is digital computer programs where you can be combining multiple videos. I'm sure digital effects. I have a friend who is very into that, and like he does projections for all the Soul Night parties in Arcata. But he knows how to overlay and get these fully psychedelic visuals happening, which can, like you said, be projected on the screen or just over the band. And yeah, I mean, why not? Why not add those kinds of visuals to lots of different live performances? That enhances the experience for sure.
Let's talk about where it went. So where did psychedelia go? Did it just disappear, or did it morph into something else? And what I'm rattling my papers here, but it sort of turned into progressive rock in some ways, and also what they call krautrock, and heavy metal, of course. I had on my list Tangerine Dream, which was still is, in fact, a very psychedelic outfit. Movements of a Visionary I had on my list, but really you could just point at any of the late '60s, early '70s Tangerine Dream, and you will have a psychedelic experience. But
Indeed.
Psychedelia never really went away. Disco kind of rolled over it for a while, and punk came in, and instead of being music being a very loose and floaty experience, it became a very tight and tough and riveting, down and dirty sort of music. But there was always percolating in the background. Pink Floyd, of course, never went away. Well, maybe they're gone now, but they lasted for a very long time. Hawkwind, you mentioned, still going, and probably enough after all these years. but there is a lot of psychedelia still being recorded today. And I think you and I both have some stuff on our list from modern psychedelic or neo
Yeah,
psychedelic bands. So why don't we talk about that a little bit?
indeed. Yeah, and I think I had mentioned a popular term for it today is psych rock, um, which to me, I guess, kind of connotes a bit of um, sort of a retro influence or harkening back to the late 60s, early 70s. Um, and it's, in today's world, it's a subcultural movement that has gone back in time and tried to sort of harness influences from those original bands and original records, while taking it to new places. And it's a huge subcultural movement of bands wanting to be psychedelic rock in many different ways. So I put some examples of stuff I'm familiar with. I'm sure you're familiar with other things, and tried to kind of find stuff that comes at psychedelia from different angles. So I put a group called Goat, which is fairly modern. Their first album is called World Music, and it really does feel like they're drawing from music from the Eastern Hemisphere a lot, Africa to farther east, combining with the kind of heavy acid rock vibe. There's a group called Radio Moscow that actually resided in Eureka for a short time about 10 years ago. And they were, I think, from Ohio and actually friends with the leader of the Black Keys. But they were doing this kind of heavy blues psychedelia, very blues-based, but acid rock. And then there's a band that is from South America, I believe, called Dungeon, which is a very unique take on psychedelia. Spacemen Three, which eventually one of the members of Spacemen Three became a group known as Spiritualized. And they were kind of a more kind of slow burn, heady, psychedelic vibe. I didn't pick a song from the album, but just to describe where their heads were at in the mid to late 80s, they had an album called Taking Drugs to Make Music to Take Drugs To. And also another one called Perfect Prescription. So, they were definitely on the psychedelic mind-altered trip. And I got a bunch more. People could just dive into that list. I'll mention before you add to it, there was also a great period in the late 80s into the early 90s coming out of Japan. Rock and rollers over there that were into psychedelic rock just took it to extreme, intense levels. And a band that I really love that I believe is in my list is High Rise. Just over the top, monstrous, extreme, fuzzed out guitar assault, but it's going for that intense psych rock vibe.
Yeah, I think of the Boredoms from that period, Japanese rock band, very very trippy and very heavy. So yeah, for my list, I have the Black Hollies, who they didn't really stay psychedelic, but their first couple of records, and especially their second record, Casting Shadows, that came out in 2006, was very very psychedelic, almost an homage to psychedelia. And I had Eye of a Mermaid as the song that I picked from that particular record. And of course, Dukes of the Stratosphere. which was an XTC side project, which is a great psychedelic record for any era. The song I picked was a song called 25 O'Clock. And you kind of wonder, is this tongue in cheek? Do they really, are they really paying an homage to psychedelia? Or is it a parlor trick? You know, what is the, what are they up to? But whatever they're up to, they did it extremely well. And then you get to things like Animal Collective, a very psychedelic band from the Merriweather record. I picked Lion in a Coma, which is kind of has a double meaning there. They mean a lion, like a lion with fur, and instead of lying on the ground, I guess. And then the other thing I had was Grizzly Bear and their song Ready Able, which has a very, very trippy video that accompanies it. And finally, there's a band called White Fence, which is a very, very psychedelic modern band. Their record, I think it came out, I can't think of the name offhand of the album, but it came out in 2017 or 2018. And I have the song Sticky Fruit Man. So, very, very trippy, but people are still doing these records.
Yeah. Yeah, the first couple that you mentioned when I was checking out your list, stuff that I was completely unfamiliar with. And then some of the other ones you just talked about, I think, are great examples of modern psychedelia, and not so much from the psych rock perspective, but more psychedelia. You just used the word trippy. So more about many, many layers of interesting sounds and more of an kind of an art pop perspective. White Fence, I can't recall, but I think that's a side project of someone who's in another group. And then, like with Animal Collective, I think multiple members of that group have done lots of their own projects. But going back to the Dukes of Stratosphere, I love them, and I have one of the two records, I believe, that they made. And yeah, they were hearkening back to that sort of pre-acid rock psychedelic vibe. And my favorite song from them is called Brainiac's Daughter. And honestly, I don't really know how to describe that stuff. It's just arty, trippy, psychedelic pop music, I guess.
Just to pick up on what you were saying is, I talked about where it sort of went after the 70s, but into the O's and the teens, we have acid house and trance and rave music and those sort of trip hop, and those sort of things that have sort of come in, to the club scene, and for people that are experiencing, certain chemicals and and substances, and like to go out dancing and spend time in clubs listening to this stuff. So it's amazing how the culture kind of went away, but the remains of the culture sort of are still here. I mean, I think of if you think of the psychedelic movement, there was just art and literature, things like Carlos Castaneda and all of these authors and artists, and just aside from the music part of it, there was just a very wide range of culture that is just sort of dried up, but the music somehow remains.
Yeah. I mean, listening to you speak to that point, my brain starts thinking of how music in itself, no matter what kind of music it may be classified as, can have the ability to alter your consciousness or sense of reality in that moment. It can take you away from everyday things that we deal with in our lives. Certainly some music you would not call psychedelic, but let's say something that you're really into and moved by, you put your headphones on, and the experience you could have hearing all the different layers of sound that go into it. So, you could put on classical music and really have an intense experience that sort of may feel like it's manipulating your state of consciousness in a very intense way, like you talked about with trance and acid house and stuff like that. I'm sure to people that really love that, they may consider that to be psychedelic music. So, and then I was thinking how I completely forgot to put Miles Davis in the mix from 69 through the 70s. That was very psychedelic music, but it's still thought of in the jazz category, so we don't often associate jazz with psychedelia. But God, is there a better example of psychedelia than...
Right, and that's a good point, because we also, on your list, you had Funkadelic, Maggot Brain. They're a lot of the stuff they did was psychedelic, but that particular whole record was a very trippy record. But there was a huge African American contribution that, like so many things having to do with African Americans, completely overlooked. I think of like the Chambers Brothers. Time Has Come Today. They're just made a huge contribution to psychedelia, and of course there would be no music of modern kind without African Americans at all. But a lot of times we don't think of them as being part of that culture. We think of them as being somehow separate. Everybody knows about Motown. Everybody knows knows about the R&B, the circuit, and those contributions. But oftentimes the contributions of African Americans to psychedelia is neglected or overlooked.
Yeah, that's a really important point to make. Of course, Jimi Hendrix is in our list, but how many other artists do we not think of in the term of psychedelic music? And that's unfair. Actually, I wish I would have put a little more thought into it. Mentioned Miles Davis, but yeah, from some other people's perspective, we would not have that movement in music, perhaps, without the contribution of those Americans. And it's kind of along the lines of how we somehow separated rock and roll from black music culture. That's pretty ridiculous. But
I just flashed on the song. It's not on my list, but a song by The Temptations called Psychedelic Shack.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and the Temptations by the early 70s had become a completely funky group, incorporating psychedelic vibes into their music. They were also very reactionary to the Vietnam War and expressing a lot of feelings about that. There's a record I've been obsessed with recently by a kind of a soul pop group called the Friends of Distinction that I consider to be psychedelic soul. And even the Fifth Dimension were playing around with the psychedelic soul vibe on some tracks.
A little bit. I mean, even Brazil
Connection.
66, they have this record called Crystal Illusions.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and the title track off of that is kind of their stab at the psychedelic movement. It's a great song, and of course they were great, but it's just like not what you would think, would be, because they were just, I don't want to say square, but they were, they were kind of reinterpreting pop music, and they're very
Check
poppy.
out some more Fifth Dimension records, man. They get pretty heavy sometimes. You could edit that part out if you want, but let's say the Rotary Connection.
Okay.
Which was actually a mixed group. It was some Black Americans and white folks in the group, but the lead singer was Minnie Riperton, and they have this kind of psychedelic Baroque orchestral soul thing going on, and some of their stuff is pretty mind tripping.
I hope this show has been a trip for our listeners and our watchers. But I think we're just about time to wrap up this thing here. And I want to say thanks for joining us on Low Pass Filter again. Be sure and like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell to be notified about future shows. You can contact us at lowpassfilter2020@gmail.com. I'm going to have to go by and check the mailbox. It's been a while since I have. But if you have comments or suggestions, please get in touch with us. And we'll try and incorporate it into a future show. And I just want to thank Bandon for being here today and for the great conversation, and say we'll see you next time on Low Pass Filter. Thanks for watching Low Pass Filter. Contact the hosts at lowpassfilter2020@gmail.com. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell to be notified about future shows.